Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Lupus LA's News from the Lab. I am Adam Selkowitz, the founding chair of Lupus LA and the host of the Lupus LA podcast, Your Story, Our Fight, which is on hiatus at the moment. For the summer. So this is good timing for some very interesting content. And I am really thrilled to be here today with my friend, Caroline Jefferies, who is an associate professor at Cedars-Sinai and is the scientific director for the Center for Research in Women's Health Sciences at Cedars, and is the exact perfect person to talk about this interesting news that came up about 10 days ago. My inbox started blowing up. Texts came from all over the place. They found the root cause of lupus. What, is this good for you? What is it? So we are going to get it all explained today. So welcome, Caroline, and tell me. So I know this study was a super small sample of people. So tell me a little bit about what they were studying and how this really affects those out there living with lupus.
Sure, I'd love to. This is such an interesting study and such a nice study. And in fact, we had one of the senior authors of the study, Deepak Rao, on the Lupus Global Symposium 3 years ago. And he was starting his journey on this story at that point, and started to describe some of the mechanisms behind this. Just shows you that was 3 years ago. It takes 3 years to get these things to
Yeah.
fruition and published. It's not an easy journey, but yeah, so it's a really nice study from a group from Northwestern Feinberg Medical Center, and also from the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Harvard. So there were three co-authors, Calvin Law, well, I'm going to absolutely butcher these names, Wakleche and Cow, and then the senior authors were Choi and Deepak Rao. And so basically what this study showed was that, so Deepak Rao, actually, let me just go back a bit. Deepak Rao, probably about 5 years ago, described this new set of T cells, so immune cells that can basically activate the immune system, tell your B cells what they're doing, tell your B cells to produce antibodies. So he described this new set of B cells, which he called T cells, and that's what he was describing in his Lupus LA Global Symposium talk. And he showed that they circulate in your body, and then when there's an inflammatory response or a viral response, they go to that site and they start secreting proteins called chemokines that basically attract B cells to the area, and then the B cells mature and start producing antibodies against the virus. But in addition to viral infections, that also happens in autoimmune disease. So if you have lung disease and lupus, kidney disease, you have formation of these, what they call tertiary lymphoid structures, which are basically these antibody producing accumulations of cells in your tissues or in your organs. And so, these T follicular helper cells are, a really interesting target for lupus and a very important target for lupus. And so in this study, what they showed was that the T follicular helper cells are regulated by a receptor. So this is a transcription factor which basically regulates gene expression. They're regulated by the aryl hydrocarbon receptor, AHR, and that receptor actually is an important receptor in our body for sensing toxins, environmental toxins. And basically, if it senses environmental toxins, it's turned on, and it basically helps get rid of those viral toxins. But it's also very important in the immune response because it suppresses the immune response. So it turns inflammatory T cells into anti-inflammatory T cells.
Right.
And that's very important for,
That's in a normal
that's in a
change. That's
normal
in a normal
context.
person,
Yeah,
normal context. Okay.
yeah. And what they showed was that if you activate this receptor, so you do the opposite to so basically if you activate this receptor in lupus cells, you can turn off inflammation and you can make them more anti-inflammatory. So that's kind of, the root cause of the root, the hub of this paper. And they had a really nice diagram within the paper where they showed, let me see if I can actually share it. Now, this is where it all goes haywire for me, as
You
me
can
and
do it. I know you can
technology.
do it. And Brianna's
Yeah.
here in case of emergency.
Well,
Indeed.
it's more if I can actually find the right PowerPoint, and if not, we'll just ignore it. Show all windows. Here we go. Thing is the problem is I have too many windows open.
Always.
It's
All
gratifying
scientists
season,
have too many
folks.
windows open all the time. Scientists and lawyers have too many windows
All
open.
right, now it's not going to happen. I don't know where it's gone. I could probably shut it down. Let me see. Here it is here. Presentation one. Let me try sharing again. See, folks, this is what happens when you put a scientist in onto a camera.
All good.
Oh, here we go. All right. Share. Okay. So this is what I have. Let me see now what happens when I hit screen show or whatever it
I
is.
see it.
Looks good to us.
Yeah.
You got it?
Yep. That's perfect.
Can you still see it?
Yep.
You see it in presentation mode?
No, but
No?
I don't
All right,
think so.
don't worry about
Yeah,
it because
yeah,
I'll
that's
just
fine.
take you through it. Yeah, don't
Yeah.
worry. Okay, so basically, so here's the aryl hydrocarbon receptor. So this is this toxin sensing receptor. And if it's activated, it triggers these T cells to produce a cytokine called IL-22, which is immunosuppressive. So that keeps the immune system nice and quiet, unactivated, etc. If you inhibit this, if you inhibit this, yes, basically, this is what happens with double negatives as well with me. You inhibit this receptor, it basically triggers the T cells to start producing this CXCL13, which is an attractant, a chemoattractant, which basically brings the B cells to the area and promotes inflammation, autoantibody production, and basically is very toxic for lupus patients.
So so when you go that direction and it's
Yeah.
inhibited, that is potentially where we're talking about this root cause of lupus. That's what's
Yes.
happening in the body, and it's abnormal and causing the problem.
Yes. And actually, the one thing that they didn't show, and maybe I missed it, was that this was abnormal in the body. They showed that you could modulate it, that you could turn it on and turn it off, and you could switch. If you turned it on, you could switch cells so that they were immunosuppressive. If you turned it off, then they were inflammatory. But they showed those sections. I think the next step for them really is to show that yes, it is abnormal and that its activity is abnormal in the body. Maybe its expression, maybe there's less of it in lupus patients. So that was one thing that struck me about it.
And I see on the, we talked about, I know your research is a lot in dealing with interferon signatures and things like that. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that may play a role in this discovery?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so let me just do this for a second. Get rid of all these numbers. Okay, so yeah, so anything red in this PowerPoint basically is suggesting that it's inhibiting it or it's basically turning it off. And what they showed, which was very nice in the study, was that interferons negatively impact this receptor. So they're basically driving things this way. They're
So
driving
if you
things
have a
towards
high, because
inflammation.
explain interferons to the audience here in
Yeah,
terms of
sure.
what that
So
means.
they're antiviral cytokines that we know in lupus are overexpressed, so that we have more of them in lupus. And basically, what they do is they program your immune cells to recognize your tissues as non-self, as viral, and basically turn your immune system on so that it attacks your tissues. It also is, it's not just your immune system that it affects, it actually affects your endothelial cells, your blood vessels, your skin cells, lots of different cells in the body. But, most of the work in lupus is focused on its role in overactivating immune cells. And you can see in this, like, so if the interferons are basically triggering or down-regulating the AHR response, then what they're doing is they're increasing the expression of CXCL13 and driving inflammation. So there's this very nice axis that they showed, or not so nice for lupus patients, very, linear axis between the interferons, AHR, and then increased inflammation in lupus patients. I think what struck me about this was that, we've been doing some work in the lab on immunometabolism. So basically how your immune cells utilize energy sources and how that affects the cell's function. So we know that, like, if your immune cells are active, then they're utilizing glucose to make lactic acid. If your immune cells are immunosuppressive, then they're utilizing glucose to make energy. And, the building blocks for protein metabolism and fatty acid metabolism. And actually, there's an intersection here with this study, although they didn't discuss it in the paper, with metabolism and the AHR receptor. And, that's super interesting because the AHR receptor has been looked at in cancer, so from the opposite direction. So anything that we're interested in lupus for turning off the immune system, in cancer, they're really looking at it from the opposite direction in order to turn on the immune system. And they're actually looking at the AHR receptor in cancer because it is activated by tryptophan, which you can see here at the top left of this PowerPoint. And tryptophan is one of these amino acids that's found in every protein. So it's an essential amino acid. And one of the ideas in cancer is that you inject tryptophan into the tumor microenvironment and you can basically activate the AHR. Sorry. Oh my goodness, I'm going the other way around. I told you that I can tie myself up in knots.
That's okay. It's very complicated. I can tell you that just from my perspective.
Yeah, it's you don't want to activate the AHR, you want to inhibit. So they're basically putting inhibitors of the AHR into cancer so that they shift things towards inflammation. From our perspective, we want to be thinking about, like, activating the AHR. So we want to, like, think about tryptophan and some of its metabolites as basically interacting with AHR and turning it on so that you get this immunosuppressive
And
immunosuppression response.
I see also on the chart sex differences. Obviously we know that lupus is primarily affects women, or it seems to. So is that also is this study also enlightening on that front?
Well, it's not something that they discussed, but it's something, I've had an interest in sex differences in lupus and also estrogen responses in lupus. We had a paper years ago that showed that the estrogen receptor in lupus patients was more highly expressed than in healthy control individuals in their immune cells. And that kind of led us to start looking at the estrogen receptor and how it was driving immune activity in lupus patient cells. And actually, there's a kind of a competition between the estrogen receptor and AHR. So the estrogen receptor turns off AHR. It can compete for its sites. It can, so that type of modulation that estrogen can do to AHR could be very, very fundamentally interesting in the context of lupus. So I'd love to see them go down this road, looking at the estrogen receptor in lupus patients, whether it's affecting AHR activity, and how does that relate to sex differences in lupus? Like, we know that women are, 90% of patients are women. Estrogen definitely has a role to play in lupus. We know that, like, basically the times in a woman's life when estrogen levels are high is when their disease activity is highest. But the flip side of that is that men with lupus tend to have more aggressive disease. and we don't know why that is. And
Mhm.
I think learning all of these differences about all the nuances of sex differences in lupus is very interesting, and could tell us a lot about disease in both men and women, but also how we can use that information to maybe look at pathways such as this, or
Mhm.
target pathways such as this. Maybe there is something that's happening. The other side of things is the environment is key to triggering lupus. We've been doing some work on sunlight exposure, and
Mhm.
effects of UV activation of lupus skin cells, and how that can induce flares, and the interferon response. The AHR receptors is key to detecting
Environment.
and responding to environmental toxins. So, if it's not as active, or not expressed as highly as much, or it's not as protective in lupus patients, then that may go a very long way to explaining part of the part of the conundrum of lupus, I suppose,
Yeah.
is the best way to say it. So, I mean, I didn't particularly like the headlines from NBC. Was NBC and MS?
A lot of different
Yeah,
sources.
a
I
lot of
got
different
them from all
places.
over the place. Yeah.
Talking about the root cause of lupus, and claiming that that this had been found. But this is a very influential paper. It's a very influential study. It does open a lot of new avenues for exploration,
Mhm.
and potential ways to therapeutically intervene. Can diet regulate this? And I mean, that's something that has is been looked at a
My
lot.
worst nightmare. My worst nightmare is having to change my diet. But
Why?
my wife is very pro diet changes, but it's my one vice. So I don't know. But so let me ask you this, just from a I'm assuming most of our audience got the same response that I got from people sending me this article and saying,
I'll
isn't
stop
this
sharing
great?
this,
Isn't this
actually.
great? So
Hmm.
so what can lupus patients expect from this study in the short term and in the long term? How does this change the game? Obviously, I know in the last 5 to 7 years, there's so many new therapies, there's so many pharmaceutical companies, a lot of whom we work with at Lupus LA, that are so focused on lupus, which is a huge change from 25 years ago. But what do you think is the next big step forward? I guess we should also, I know I'm asking too many questions at one time, but we should also sort of follow up on the conversation we had the last time about the study in Europe, um, those patients that were treated with that therapy, and as the cure for lupus, that so where are we on those two fronts?
Okay. Um, I'm going to pick and choose what I answer here.
Okay. I gave you a
No,
lot to choose from, so.
no, no. I think this study opens doors y- to using aryl hydrocarbon receptor inhibitors, activators, as a co-treatment,
Mhm.
potentially. And I think it's a good way, it's a good place to start on this.
And those
And
drugs
these are,
exist now.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
so that's not something where we identified this and now we have to wait 10 years for the medicines to catch up. We have those medicines if they determine that this works.
Right, let me just check Google. Hang on.
Okay. Um,
AHR activators. Yes, this is something I should have looked at.
but that's something that I think that would
They,
sort
you
of.
know, they are been developed like this, first in human phase 1 studies. So
Got it.
these
Okay.
these
So they're
are,
they're
in
they're
clinical
there. Okay.
development, yeah, for other indications. Um, there may be other ways that we can modulate its activity, maybe through diet.
Hmm.
Maybe, tryptophan is an essential amino acid, and that means that you have to ingest it. Your bodies don't make it. So
Hmm.
you
Okay.
you basically have to take it in. And most proteins, any source that's rich in proteins is going to have tryptophan in it.
Hmm.
Um, Also, looking at how interferon inhibition and maybe these activators of AHR interface and whether they can augment the responses to these to say the interferon therapy, because interferon therapy is great for certain patients, but not hasn't been so efficacious in others. The JAK inhibitors, so that's a very broad
Hmm.
term. So there's like three JAKs, four JAKs, JAK 1, 2, 3, and then TYK2. And TYK2 is the one that's specific for the interferon response.
Hmm.
So, maybe the TYK2 inhibitors could
Beneficial.
work very well with this medication as well. So I think combinations, combinatorial approaches to basically treating lupus, to turning off the immune response, could be very efficacious.
And so to clear up the end of my last question, what we talked
Yeah,
about the last time was this CAR T treatment for
yeah,
lupus and that study. And I maybe I'm being, but that was a T cell treatment. Also, this is a T cell. Do these two relate? Number one, and what's the status of the CAR T? I know there's a lot of research being focused on it right now.
yeah. So the status of the European group is very promising. They've shown they haven't had any, relapse of disease.
Have
That's
they
the
added more
domestic.
patients to the study, or they're still in those same original patients?
They've added different types of patients. They've added scleroderma patients, myositis patients. I'm not the best person to
Hmm.
answer that.
But so
Dan
far,
Wallace
that's
would be.
still promising.
That's very promising. Other companies have had like nearly as good results. Kyverna had one relapse from a CAR T, but it was a slightly different CAR T. So they're all very different, like
Hmm.
constructs that they're putting into your T cells to do
Okay.
this, and they have to be, because otherwise people wouldn't have patents and they wouldn't be able to compete with each other the way they are. There was a new paper just published in Cell, which I haven't had a chance to read. It just came up in my inbox yesterday, that was talking about using what they call allogeneic CAR Ts. So they're ones that you can just take off the shelf. So they've engineered T cells from healthy control patients, so that they don't react with when you put them into the body of somebody who doesn't have the same compatibility. So that's very promising. I think that's where the
That
industry
would be your
needs to
shelf,
go.
not your general CVS
Yeah.
shelf. But yes, but no, I mean, so generally speaking, because I know we
Actually,
have to wrap it up,
you
but
mentioned something really interesting there about this focus on T cells, which it is very interesting to me, because I haven't been
mhm,
investigated T cells. I haven't been that interested in T cells as an immunologist. I'm mostly interested in innate immune cells.
right.
So, the ones that respond quickly and non-specifically, or so they say, to a threat. So this focus back on T cells and T cell biology is very, very interesting,
Mhm.
because
Well, and it
we've
seems like
switched in the last few years.
the Benlistas and the Rituxans, and they're focusing on B cells, right? And so not
And
that
the CAR
that's
T therapy is focused on B cells and getting rid of B cells as well.
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to the lay
So,
people, it's all very confusing, but I think from what I'm hearing, it's a really exciting time in the world of lupus research and the potential world of lupus treatments. And I will just say anecdotally, when we started Lupus LA, there was like a couple, maybe two, three companies working in lupus, and now there are dozens. And I think that alone not only shows results, but it shows the promise of the future.
do you know what I think drove that was the Lupus Research Alliance, or the ALR, as it was called way back when. They So Woody Johnston basically put a lot of resources in behind research for lupus. And that really focused basic scientists to start, translating what they knew about antiviral immunity, because we were all focused on interferons, and that's viral immunity. It it really made them start looking at lupus in a way that hadn't been looked at before.
Mhm.
And that has really, actually, it has been the funding. Throwing funding at research has
Yeah.
really, really driven this. And I can't emphasize that enough, actually.
No, I
Um,
appreciate that.
you know,
And
and
honestly, Lupus LA was really one of the early funders of the LRI and the ALR, early on in their time. And I think we partnered well with them over the years. And I think what I remember when the Lupus Research Institute was started was all of these novel ideas. So it was focusing on not sort of the tried and true methods. And it seems to me now, 20 years later, that those novel approaches and that, hey, let's try this or let's try that seems to be really paying off.
yeah, I'd agree. I mean, they've funded what we call blue skies research,
Mhm.
really novel avenues that the NIH wouldn't fund.
Mhm.
And that's spurred a lot of this. It really has. And I think that's what we need more of, is kind of unrestricted funding to allow us to do that blue skies research. So yes, increasing fundraising for lupus, and advocating for fundraising in lupus, as so
Yeah.
many people are doing, is huge.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking longer than expected amount of your time to go through all this. I'm sure we have made a big difference today in terms of everybody's understanding of what's going on, and wishing you continued success in your research, and really wishing everybody out there who's working on lupus success. And on behalf of all lupus patients, we're showing our appreciation for sure.